Hello, this is Megan from Hope for the Journey, and I recently wrote a blog about stress responses, and there were a couple of things that I wanted to expand on. So I did a video on the window of tolerance, and this video is going to be about just a deeper dive into the different types of stress responses. So let's talk about it. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, so buckle up. So starting from the beginning, trauma responses or stress responses are the automatic ways that our brains prepare us to survive dangerous situations. So you might have heard the terms fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Those are all stress responses that are activated in dangerous situations or in situations that our brains perceive as dangerous. So let's look at the major players involved in stress responses first, and then we'll talk about the chain of events that take place during a stress response. Okay, so let's start with the amygdala. The amygdala is fun to say, and it's the part of the brain responsible for just detecting threats in your environment and reacting before you have a chance to consciously or logically process it. So this is why scary movies make us jump and send that adrenaline rush through our bodies, even though our logical brain knows that we're safe. Okay, and then we have the hypothalamus, which basically manages and regulates things like our body temperature, our heart rate, our blood pressure, our sense of hunger and thirst, our sleep signals, just things that keep our body stable and in a state of homeostasis. So it's also responsible for releasing or prohibiting hormones, again, in an effort to keep our bodies nice and balanced. Okay, so now to talk about the nervous system, I'm going to break it down into 4 parts and then focus on 3 of those parts. So we have the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system deals with like movement and muscle control, and the autonomic nervous system deals with all the automatic and unconscious workings of our body, like organ functioning, which we don't have to consciously control, right? So we're not going to worry about the somatic nervous system, and we're going to break the autonomic nervous system into 2 more parts. So the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for the fight or flight and kind of freeze response and prepares the body for survival. So it increases your heart rate, your blood pressure, respiration, muscle tension, blood sugar, all those things to prepare for action. And the parasympathetic nervous system then counteracts the effects of the sympathetic nervous system and brings us back to a place of rest and digest, or feed and breed once the danger has resolved. So those are the parts that we need to know about when talking about the stress responses. So let's talk about the first 2, fight or flight. Okay, so it starts with the amygdala. Remember, the amygdala's job is to process fear. So all day long, it's taking in what we see and hear and smell and taste and feel, and determining if any of that information indicates danger. So if you're just lying on the couch reading a book and listening to some nice calming music, the amygdala isn't going to pick up any danger cues from your environment. However, if you're out for a walk and you suddenly hear a horn and see a car speeding toward you, the amygdala is going to interpret that as danger and instantly and automatically send a distress signal to its buddy, the hypothalamus. So now the hypothalamus will activate the sympathetic nervous system through the ANS until the adrenal glands start pumping epinephrine, which is adrenaline, through our bloodstream. So we have epinephrine coursing through our bodies, which causes the heart to beat faster, the lungs to expand to be able to take in more oxygen, our blood sugar levels are boosted to supply the body with energy, and so many other things are going on that give us that adrenaline rush and prepares us for action. So all of this, from the amygdala interpreting something we saw or heard as dangerous to the rush of epinephrine through our bodies, is almost instantaneous. So you'd be able to jump out of the way of that speeding car before you could even process what was happening. So it's cool. And then when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, your two options are to fight the threat or run away from it. And you've definitely seen both of these reactions if you've ever seen a prank video where someone like jumps out of a trash can or something to scare another person, and the person being pranked will sometimes just take a swing at the prankster or scream and flinch away. And you can see the automatic reflexive nature of the fight or flight response when the victim of the prank is shocked by their reaction afterward, because their logical brain is just now catching up and realizing that what they reacted to as a threat wasn't actually a threat. Okay, now the freeze response is a little different because now the parasympathetic nervous system is also activated at a similar level as the sympathetic nervous system. So remember, the parasympathetic nervous system counteracts the sympathetic nervous system. So if you haven't seen my video about the window of tolerance, I talk about hyper and hypoarousal. So when someone is in the freeze response, they're hyperaroused in the sense that they're experiencing the biological sympathetic response of an increased heart rate and blood pressure and tense muscles and everything else that prepares them to run or fight. But in a freeze response, the parasympathetic nervous system is also activated because there's nowhere for that energy to go. It's not an option to fight the threat or get away from it. So the body is just stuck in this in-between space where it's aware of what's happening, but it can't take any action, or it's not safe to take any action. This is very common in sexual abuse and assaults, or other attacks like school shootings, where it isn't safe to fight back or run away. And it's so important to remember that just like fight or flight, the freeze response is automatic. On top of the trauma that comes from all of those stress hormones and energy being trapped in the body, the freeze response can also make people feel like a sense of shame and guilt because they think they didn't do enough, or that they should have done something. But freezing is not a conscious choice. Also, fun tip for any first responders or medical professionals: if you are ever working with a patient who just experienced something that could have activated a freeze response, like an assault or a car accident or a school shooting, or even childbirth, and they're shaking or trembling, just let them shake. That's one of the ways our bodies can naturally release that traumatic energy so it doesn't get stuck in our bodies. And that really decreases the chance of developing PTSD and other body-based trauma symptoms later on. Okay, before we talk about the fawn response, I'm gonna throw in a bonus stress response that I didn't include in the blog because we typically only see this in like really intense life-threatening situations, and the blog was more about stress responses in everyday life. But I want to talk about the collapse or tonic immobility response, which I'm just going to call the fall response to keep with the F theme. And this is different than the freeze response in that the fall response, the parasympathetic nervous system has taken over and the person is in a true state of hypoarousal. Check out that window tolerance video if you forgot what that is. So in the freeze response, we have some of the sympathetic nervous system stimulation that is increasing the heart rate and blood pressure, and tensing your muscles to prepare for action. But in the fall response, where the parasympathetic nervous system is dominant, your heart rate and blood pressure actually drop and your muscles just kind of go loose and limp. So your system is basically just shutting down because something really, really bad is happening. The fall response is a last-ditch effort to survive. So some really cool things happen though. One of the things that can happen is that the sensory information doesn't make it past the part of the brain that relays it to the cerebral cortex, where it gets interpreted and integrated. So what that means is that your brain basically isn't registering or absorbing what you're seeing or hearing or feeling. On top of that, endorphins are released to numb pain, and then dissociation can also occur, which can make you feel completely detached from your body, or it can make it seem like the horrible thing that's happening is actually happening to someone else, or you're just kind of watching it happen to yourself, but you don't really feel it at all. So this total shutdown can also lead to just literal collapse or loss of consciousness. And we see this a little bit in animals that use playing dead as a defense mechanism. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there because the fall response can be confused with the freeze response, but they're very different. Okay, so finally, the fawn response. This is more likely to happen in long-term or ongoing trauma where you would do lots of people-pleasing behaviors to appease or comply with the threat and avoid conflict altogether, which then establishes safety. So since fawning develops because of ongoing stress, it's a very common symptom of complex PTSD. And fawning can then become just a normal thing you do with people in your life because you've accurately learned that being able to predict and respond to threatening behaviors or actions is what keeps you safe. So along with people-pleasing behaviors, we're also going to see an underdeveloped sense of identity. So you may feel like you don't actually know what you enjoy doing or what kind of music you like or what your favorite food is or what you're good at because your main focus has been identifying someone else's wants and needs so that you can keep them appeased and keep yourself safe. You might also have little or no boundaries with other people and find it extremely hard to stand up for yourself because, again, it hasn't been safe. Okay, so just to recap, stress responses are automatic, not a choice, and the overall goal for all of them is safety and survival. So if any of this resonated with you or you've experienced some of the responses or have felt shame for having some of these responses, head over to our website at hopeforthejourney.org because all of our therapists specialize in trauma and are trained to help your brain and body process and resolve anything that's gotten stuck in there. So on top of unprocessed trauma, just feeling awful, it can cause all kinds of symptoms like anxiety and depression and nightmares and flashbacks and dissociation and stomach aches and headaches and so many other things that we don't want you to have to live with. So do something kind for yourself and get the help you deserve.